Alrighty, so today's video is going to be a legendary tier list for Legends of the Force. I'm going to break down every single legendary card from this set, talk about their power levels, what I think you can do with them in competitive play, maybe complain a little bit about some of them being a little too weak. It's going to be a lot of fun. Before we get going, please hit that subscribe button and that like button. It helps out the channel a ton. And if you're interested in some more content from me, including live deck builds for Legends of the Force, do check out my Patreon as well. All right, so the goals of this video, like I said, I'm going to talk about the power level of all of these legendary cards, talk about what I think you can do with them in decks, how to build around them, where they might see play. Remember, this is a for fun list, nothing too serious, and I'm not basing this based on what I think will be their price at pre-release or post-release. This is not like a financial-based ranking, so yeah, just wanted to get that out of the way. But the first thing I want to do is talk about a trio of cards that are not legendary that I think could have been and possibly should have been legendary in this set. So not going to deep dive on these cards, but the first one is Mace Windu. I mean, this is an incredibly iconic character, a very, very powerful card with like kind of a legendary feel to it. Big unit comes down, defeats something. Yeah, and iconic too. It's just kind of a complete package. Not only is it not legendary, it's also an uncommon. Kind of wild to me that a card like this is uncommon. This would be one of the best legendaries in the set, most likely, if it was legendary. And I would very much like cards of this sort of power level and this sort of iconic status to be in the legendary pool, because we're going to see quite a lot of cards that, in my opinion, are probably way too weak or niche to deserve a legendary slot. The second one is Ki-Adi-Mundi, another heroic red card. Now, he's not as iconic a character as Mace Windu, although he's a named Jedi. He might be one of the most, if not the most powerful card in this entire set, right? Like, draw 2 on a 4/4 body. That's very, very good. And on pure power level, this certainly would deserve legendary status. He's also just an uncommon. So, you know, if you're looking to just fill out your deck's full of really, really good cards very, very easily, it certainly helps to have them be uncommon. But I also would like the power level on the chase cards in the game to be a little higher. And the last one's probably the weirdest one to be an uncommon. Once again, yes, uncommon, Kelleran Beq. This is like home 1 power crept / Ewing reinforcements. This card is crazy. It has the same, very similar text to home 1 with even less restrictions, right? Because he doesn't even need to bring heroic cards into play. This guy can go fetch a Krayt Dragon if he wants to, when you have enough resources. And then he's like, yeah, like half Ewing, half home 1. He's cheaper than home 1. Yeah, this one, in terms of like complexity too, also very much, I think, would have been deserving of a legendary status. And all 3 of these cards would have been near the top 5 of the legendary rankings, if not like near the top 1 of the legendary rankings if they had been legendary. So that is the end of that rant. But this is just like me saying that I would hope that in the future we keep seeing legendaries improve. And to be honest, this set does have better legendaries than Jump to Lightspeed did and Twilight of the Republic, so that's a good step forward. They're not nearly as core as like the first set, Spark Rebellion. Like that one is still like almost every legendary in that set is playable. Some of them are some of the best cards in the game, so maybe there's a balance between that and what we've been seeing, but still would like them to be more powerful. But let's start. I've bulked the first 12 into kind of sets of 4. This is ranked 20 to 17. Don't really differentiate. These cards are essentially unplayable. They're mostly, yeah, they're not good cards. There's nothing really to do with any of these cards. I don't even think they're particularly good in Twin Suns. Mythosaur, just a giant for 9 that does nothing when you play it. I don't understand the text of Friendly Leaders Gain the Mandalorian trait. There's not going to be a single leader alive by the time you play this card. This is mostly nonsense. Supremacy is a cool card. It costs 12. And there is like one niche cool thing you can do with this with like Galactic Ambition, right? You can bring this out for 7. So if you have a swarm of cheap vehicles in play, you can Galactic Ambition and then like try to 1-turn kill your opponent with this card. The problem is you're going to take 12 the moment you do this. So like in what matchups is that good, right? Against aggro, you'll just instantly lose the game. Against control, they probably just have an answer for this card. So yeah, whatever. It's mostly not helping. Zuckuss, I don't even understand this card. The only synergy this guy has is with the set 1 Thrawn, where you get to know what is on top of your opponent's deck. But mono yellow Thrawn support was not really on the top of the bingo card. Like, it's not what we needed. This is just a 5-drop do nothing in almost every deck. Being a double aspect card is very strange to me because it really narrows where you'd ever be able to do anything with it. So, not great. And the Father, I mean, this is a cool ability. I just don't think it needed to be on an 8-drop. Like, this would have been a cool ability if it was on, like, a 4-drop unit. When you use the Force, you can deal 1 damage to it and get the Force back, right? That would have been cool, sort of build around on a cheap unit. This is an 8-drop 5/10. This isn't doing anything anywhere. All right, next tier 16 to 13. Also mostly not particularly good, but a little more interesting. You can like squint a little and see something to do with these cards. Like Always 2, actually on rate is quite powerful. Like to give 2 units, 2 experience and 2 shields each is nice. The problem is when you go search for Sith cards in the database, you find like nothing essentially. So you would need your leader to be a Sith. You would need a few other Siths and maybe try to find some opportunity to squeeze this in. And like there would potentially be some blowout situations with this card. Mostly it's way too narrow and way too risky to use. Sindralig here, just a big thing that doesn't do very much. Like you need to jam upgrades in your deck. You need to have him and the upgrade in your hand at the same time. You need to somehow be at 8 resources and not have anything better to do than play a big beater. Yeah, like yes, I could see a world where like he closes a game out, you play him, you attach a lightsaber with him, and you hit for 8 and you win. Like, sure. But there's just like way better bombs to play in heroic decks. Legacy Run is a cool card. I think this one's really interesting. There's not a lot of ways to like self-trigger this. There are a few things that you can use to self-defeat it, like Exploit, for instance, Merciless Contest, Apology Accepted in green. It looks to be really cool with Thrawn. The problem with that is, once again, it's very difficult to trigger, and you're kind of doing a 5-cost setup, do nothing, and then it gives a lot of agency to your opponent. There's issues with bounce. There's issues with no glory, only results. The card is cool though, and like I could see some weird applications for it at times. Something at least worth trying. And then Oppo Rancisis here is actually a good card. His issue is that he's double command. I just don't think this needed to be double command. This could have just been green, and it would be a very good card. Like, no question about it. It would just be a very good card. In double command, you're just locked into kind of a poor archetype that's a very, very unsupported color, right? Double command does not have a lot of good cards. Even the double aspect command card is probably the weakest of all the double aspect cards in general. So not a lot to do here. In those decks, you're almost entirely locked into just a big ramp deck. Like, that's the only thing you can really do in double command. And he doesn't really support that archetype at all. He's more of like an aggressive early game board stabilizer with support if you've like built your deck around the proper keywords. So this card would certainly see play if it was just in green or in like green hero or green villain. But as a double command card, it's just incredibly narrow. And then the last group of 4, 12 to 9, are definitely some of them are interesting and some are just like fine, but Leia's a very interesting card. I don't think she's very good, but she is very interesting. The problem with her is that it requires a ton from you to get going. You need the Force, you need usually multiple actions, right? You need to play her, teleport her to the ground, and then you can start attacking with the units that you've buffed, right? That's 3 actions right there just to kind of get going. You also already have needed the Force to do this thing. I think it's cool with like sneak attack where you can play her. She does come in ready with sneak attack, even though she can't ready in space. She can then attack for 5 and get you the Force and then teleport to the ground. So that's like a cool interaction you can do. Overall, it's just the downside here is just incredibly high. Playing a unit for 5 that doesn't ready or do anything unless you've supported it. Your opponent can start clearing your ground arena, and then all of a sudden this buff doesn't even do anything. So it's a big combo card that I just think has way too many places where it can go bad for you. HK47, on the other hand, is just an incredibly like mundane unit. It's just decent. It's a 2/4 decent stat line, has a decent effect. It's fine. It doesn't have the right traits. Like this needed to be Force or something, because then it would actually be good in a lot of these villain Force decks who are in dire need of early game Force units and just don't have very many good ones. The ability on this is like aggressive, right? Dealing damage to your opponent's base. Sure, but the unit itself isn't particularly aggressive because he's a 2/4. And then like what kind of support do you need for this? You're killing your opponent's units, but then you're dealing damage to their base. So those are like, in a sense, a little contradictory, because a deck focused around board control and board removal is not usually an aggressive deck that also wants damage to base. But overall, the card's fine. Like this is certainly a playable card. It's just like, why is this legendary? Marchion Ro, he's a big thing that does virtually nothing when you play him. There is some like cool interaction with the Cad Bane leader, because Cad Bane innately has raid. There's a few good raid units that this can buff, like Aura Singh and Nile Marauder, and there's a few others. I'm gonna try this in Cad. That's really the only place I can think of. Like Cad being able to like flip play this and now just present 2 very big threats to your opponent is interesting. If it doesn't make the cut there, it probably won't make the cut anywhere. So it's a narrow one. It's not bad though. And then Darth Malik is another very narrow card, mostly made as support for the Darth Revan leader. There are a few other Sith leaders, but none of which that cost 5, which means like with Asajj, for instance, that costs 4, you would need her to survive a turn so that you can play Malik. The problem with the card, of course, is that it's complete nonsense the moment your leader dies. So every copy of this card is just bad once your leader dies. If you draw this after your leader, it's just nothing, and you need that turn to really line up in a way that you can just flip play this, because otherwise it does very little. And it's good when that all happens and when the board allows that to happen. I don't think Revan's going to be that competitive because of the aspectless nature of it, but Darth Malik is a solid card with that leader. All right, so let's continue. Now in the top 8 we go one by one, and at number 8 we have Bendu. And let me preface this by saying I don't think this card's actually that great. It's just mostly a little better than the other 12 we talked about. But there's one leader in particular, and that's Han-Tu. I don't think that's a giant secret. That giant units that you can play ahead of curve are a bit better with that leader. And Han-Tu is getting a lot of help in this set, because not only are we getting cards like Bendu, and one that we're going to talk about in a moment, but he also works pretty well with like the whole Force stuff, because a lot of those units are big and have powerful when played effects. But what Bendu does is essentially read keyword big. That's what it is. It's just a giant thing. And when you have enough of these giant things, you really tax your opponent, right? This is the same stat line as Krayt Dragon. They're in the same color. They curve into one another. You play Bendu, your opponent has to react. Then you play Krayt Dragon, your opponent has to react, right? If you have enough of these things in some matchups, that could be powerful. Am I convinced Bendu will make it into competitive tier Han decks? I am not. He's fine. He's an option in these decks. As a 7 cost, he's obviously way better. And that's kind of what Han-Tu does. He takes a lot of these unplayable-ish big things and make them better because they're cheaper. And he is getting a lot of help, and Bendu is a small piece to that puzzle. And he may be an option in decks like that. And number 7 is another card that is specifically for Han-Tu. I don't think this card is particularly good outside of Han-Tu, but in Han-Tu, Grogu here can be played on turn 1 with 2 damage on itself, which immediately lets it to start trigger its ability, which is really nice, right? It's not that 2 damage on turn 2 is going to kill anything, but it's going to create some challenging board states for your opponent to maneuver. It obviously also continues to turn on further in the game, because every turn after that you can still be using Han's ability, put 2 damage on one of your units, and then Grogu can heal it off and move it onto one of your opponent's stuff. He is also a force unit, which is nice, because in those cases where you absolutely need to turn on your force ability, instead of using Grogu's ability, you can just attack, and he will turn on your force base, and you'll get that force token. There is a little tension with the unit itself, because it's obviously not very good at attacking, and a lot of these force decks really require that force token to kind of get going and to establish a powerful curve. But Grogu allows some other versions of your early game to kind of exist, right? They don't have to be about the force token. When you start with Grogu, they can be about board management, and it's a solid card in Han 2, and there's a lot of cards in this set that are just good with Han 2. Grogu's one of them. And once again, am I 100% sure this will make it into every version of Han 2? I'm not. I'm a little more confident that it will over Bendu, because a turn 1 Grogu can really throw a wrench into your opponent's game plan. And yeah, it's just a solid little card. All right, at number 6, I've put Constructed Lightsaber. Would anyone actually be that surprised if this was an uncommon? Because I wouldn't. I think it could have been an uncommon. But it's a legendary, and it's a solid one. It's not amazing. It's not better, in my opinion, than some other lightsabers we've seen, like General's Blade, Fallen Lightsaber, Jedi Lightsaber. I think a lot of those cards in many ways are better, especially because those cards can also be attached to non-force units, even if they're not going to give a buff. Constructed Lightsaber can only be attached to a force unit. You're usually not giving anything Sentinel. There's not a lot of neutral cards you'd be attaching this to. In fact, you usually attach cards like this to leaders so that they can't be hit by like hard removal and bounce. But in general, Raid 2 is kind of turns this into a pseudo Darksaber for villain, because it's a +4 power. The Restore 2 is nice on some heroic leaders. It's a solid card, and it gives leaders that maybe wouldn't have previously had access to a lightsaber access to them, right? Because not every deck is going to play the colors required for General's Blade or Jedi Lightsaber or Fallen Lightsaber. And now you have just a sturdy card for these Force leaders that you can play in colors that you otherwise wouldn't have had access to a powerful upgrade like this. Cool card. I expect to see this floating around in some decks because of its neutral aspect primarily. All right, at number 5, we have Grand Inquisitor, and it's one of the few actually good Force units that Villain got in this set. Karis, the uncommon 2/4 in blue, kind of being the other one. And I mean that specifically for like early curve 2 and 3 drops. Villain Force desperately needed cards like Grand Inquisitor. It needs even more than just Grand Inquisitor, but beggars can't be choosers. We got this one. It's a solid 3-drop. That's really all it is. There's nothing particularly fancy going on here. Is it better than like 3/5s in Hero, like Obi-Wan the Sentinel or Ezra? He's not really even better than those cards. He's like kind of on par with the heroic cards. And he's a legendary, so gets to see how much we value Force in Villain compared to Hero. Hero gets it on basically everything, and Villain really needs to work very hard to get that Force tag on its units. But it's a solid card. It hits for 4 as a 3-drop. Not a lot of 3-drop units do that, which means he can slay a bunch of the like X4s that people play on turn 1, which is nice. The hidden means that very likely you'll be able to get an attack off with this guy so that you can get that Force token going. Right now, I don't think there's going to be a lot of Force base synergy stuff in Villain outside of maybe Talzin, because it's not a particularly supported archetype. There's not a ton of Force units to build a robust Force deck in Villain. But he's also really cool with the Grand Inquisitor from set 1, although that leader still most likely too weak to make it into like top tier competitive play. But given that leader hidden does mean that you can kind of go off on his flip turn undisturbed. But Grand Inquisitor, a very solid 3-drop. Nothing fancy about this guy, just good rate. All right, in the final four, we get into some like actual like heavy hitters. So at number 4, I put Anakin Skywalker here, the neutral blue card that gets really, really good if you can play heroic and villainy cards in your deck. But he's also not like bad if you're only in getting one half of those triggers. Even as just a 6 cost that gives -3/-3, there is some play to this unit. But the real blowout comes from having both. And there are a few ways to do this. Just innately with some leaders like Chancellor Palpatine that can play hero and villain is of course, a fantastic place to play this. Same with the new Anakin leader, who I'm not particularly high on, but this Anakin unit is very good in a deck like that. There's the new Kylo leader that you can discard cards from your hand, especially like heroic upgrades, because he'll still be able to filter. And then bam, you've turned this guy on incidentally. So a lot of value there. He is naturally really good with ambush as well. He can clear potentially 3 units all at once. So ECL, Xi'an Flurry, Timely Intervention are all powerful things to do with this. Where this might falter will be if those leaders that I just mentioned don't end up in top tier competitive play, because I'm not certain that he's quite good enough if you're not getting both halves of these triggers. If you can build a deck, a very good deck that can play villainy and heroic cards, this might be the best card in the deck. It's just, if Chancellor is not a tier 1 deck, if Anakin's not a tier 1 deck, if Kylo isn't a tier 1 deck, then it becomes less likely that this will make a huge splash. There is one other card that's really easy to get into your discard pile that's heroic. It's Bamboozle. So like villain yellow blue decks, for instance, could run Bamboozle to just try to free roll it, get it into the discard pile. You can do things with like Force Throw to self discard heroic cards, but at a certain point you have to ask yourself, is it worth it to jam your deck with off aspect cards just on the off chance that you can sequence a discard and draw this Anakin and get the payoff that you need? And that's where I'm a little more hesitant to say that it'll work out. I think primarily you just need to look at the leaders that can kind of free roll this card and see if he really pushes them into competitive tier. All right, at number 3, I've put Yoda, a big bomb in heroic green, and heroic green is in no shortage of big bomb units. It's got home 1 in the exact same cost range. It's got the new Kelleran Beck that we've seen. We've got Ewing reinforcements, and of course, whatever big bombs in the other color that you're going to run. But Yoda does a very adequate job of being a big bomb in a Force deck. Healing 5 is really major, and it's a big way to potentially stabilize a game that you otherwise would have had no chance in stabilizing. Healing is not so easy sometimes to find in these heroic mid-range decks unless you're playing like Rey, for instance. And then the ability itself that can come down, kill a unit, and then represent like a complete board lockdown if your opponent doesn't immediately react, right? Because that ability will keep going off over and over again. So this really does qualify as a big bomb. I don't know if it elevates Hero Green in a huge way, just because Hero Green was, like I mentioned, it was not really short on big finishers or big grindy engines or big giant units that do really big things. It's great to have more options for those cards, but I don't think Yoda all of a sudden like makes a deck that was average amazing, because most of these decks could have just run other cards in this slot. And as I mentioned with like Bendu and Grogu, this guy's even better in Han, because who cares if it has 9 or 7 health? Doesn't matter that much. Him coming down a turn earlier is a major power play, and it's another buff to that leader. All right, at number 2, Qui-Gon Jinn, another big bomb, this one in yellow, and this more is like a mid-range top end. The 7 drops in this game, that's typically what they are. The big ones like Luke and Vader and Han and Enfys and whatever it may be, they're like mid-range top end, and yellow cunning usually kind of caps around here because it's not really a color that's supported in a way to play like a more controlling strategy or more grindy strategy, unless you really pair it with green, and then green kind of takes over in the grind engine. But Qui-Gon Jinn is very, very powerful. 7 on the ambush means that it's going to slay most leaders in the game and survive, for that matter, with the 5 health. It can kill a bunch of powerful things like Luke Skywalker, and when he comes down and survives, you can get major value, because when they have to kill it, he then will remove another thing off the board. And in those situations where your opponent just has 2 really important threats and you kill one and bounce the other to the top of their deck, you've kind of 2-for-1'd innately. Is this a major, similar to how Yoda isn't a major shift in like what the color can do? I think Qui-Gon is also in that same boat. Yellow hero already has Han Solo as a 7-drop. It has Enfys Nest. And then whatever 7 drops you might have played in another color, right? So it's not opening some giant area of the game for these decks. They already had access to very powerful units in that slot. He's just another option now. And in some decks, he might be better. In some decks, he might be worse. For instance, in like a Quinlan Tarkin Town deck, I still think the Han Solo will be better because he already gets to the 7 damage threshold with Quinlan's ability. And I think that getting Qui-Gon to like the 8 damage threshold is not nearly as important as going from 6 to 7 that Han does. So maybe Qui-Gon doesn't quite make the cut there, or he does as extra copies of Han. But maybe in some other decks, he could certainly be an option. And I think the card is very, very good. Like, this is not to like talk down on this card. It's very, very powerful. It's just in that same tier of some other very powerful cards like Han. So it's not creating new dynamics for this color. Worthy of the legendary slot for sure, though, as is Yoda. These are very powerful cards, and it's nice to have these tools for the decks that you're trying to build with them. And the last one, also very deserving of a legendary status, is the new Darth Vader, the Vigilance Bomb. This is a 6-drop that, needs to ambush. Let's get that out of the way. This card's not very good unless it's ambushing because it's very, very slow. It doesn't do much when you play it. As a 6-drop 5/6, its stats are not very good. It gives a shield to one of yours and one of your opponent's units, so that can actually be downside if your opponent can remove Darth Vader, because then you've just kind of given them a free shield, right? So without ambush, very mediocre. But with ambush, it's crazy, right? Because whatever you ambush, as long as they have a 5 or less health unit in play, you kill that one, you kill whatever you threw the shield on, which can be anything from a leader to a devastator in space. It doesn't matter where or what it is, it's dying to Darth Vader's on attack ability, and then you're still left over with this solid body. So what are we doing with this? First of all, you can look at ECL, right? That's blue-green villain ECL. There's already been blue-green ECL decks like Kira. Does this mean you move away from like Data Vault, which has been the more dominant Kira deck? Potentially. This is such a massive bomb that maybe you go to ECL, but the other option is to just run Timely Interventions. And I think even if you're going to be in an ECL blue-green deck, you probably just want the Timely Interventions at this point so that you have more ways to ambush with this after you've used the ECL. You might have used it earlier on another unit to help stabilize, and now if you don't have these Timely Interventions, you have a bunch of Darth Vaders in your deck that do mostly nothing. So I think you're likely going to want that, and you can do that in the Data Vault or the 30 health versions too, and just run Timely Interventions. You don't have the ECL, but now you've turned this guy into either a 7 cost play with Timely or an 8 cost play if you're smuggling it, but it can still be incredibly powerful when it does that. The other card that gives ambush is Xian Flurry, also very good with Darth Vader. If you're ambushing into something that only has 2 power, in fact, Darth Vader will actually keep the shield that he gave to himself, or you can still give a shield to one of your other units and Darth Vader just won't take any damage back. So now you can look at Cunning Blue villain decks, and there's options there. Like, you can try this with like a Tempo Talzin deck. Gar Saxon can do something like this. Barris can do something like this. Chancellor Palpatine that I mentioned with the Anakin legendary, he's already in yellow, so you can go yellow blue there and just throw these Xian Flurries with Darth Vader. There's a lot to do with this. It's a big bomb, but it requires deck investment. I want to stress that this is not just a plug and play card. It reads incredibly powerful, and it is incredibly powerful, but it requires a lot of deck consideration. and curve management, because it's very different when this guy is ambushing at 7 or 8 resources as opposed to on 6, which you can really only do either with ECL or with something like Barris, who can discount Xi and Flurry, for instance. But that is a very, very niche interaction. There's probably some other ways to discount costs of events that I'm not thinking about. And then there's like Admiral Piet, the 2-drop that you can play and give this guy ambush. Whatever it may be, ambush. You have to find a way to ambush with this guy. But when you do, he's a 3-for-1, right? And like one of the most glorious 3-for-1s you could ask for, killing a mid-range unit that has 5 or less health, killing any unit, leader or giant, and leaving behind a body. That is a very, very, very powerful play, a complete board swapping sort of power play. So that's why I've included this here over things like Yoda and Qui-Gon, which both could have theoretically been in this slot. I just find that those are more plug and play cards that give the decks that they existed more options, right? Qui-Gon doesn't fundamentally change anything about heroic cunning. Yoda does not fundamentally change anything about green heroic either. Darth Vader does fundamentally change how a green villain blue deck would run, or a yellow blue villain deck would run. It is definitely a build around, and it does something very different than a lot of other cards, and that's why it earns the number 1 slot. All right, that's what I got for you. I don't mean to talk down on a lot of these legendaries. I'm just trying to give you my honest opinion, my honest feedback about a lot of these cards. I think most of them that we saw, like especially the 12 first ones that I talked about, are not going to see too much play. They'll be very fringe. We'll start getting into like more played legendaries once you get to like that 8, 7, 6 range, where you start to see the power level of these cards go up a little bit. And like I mentioned in the beginning, I would like to see the overall power level of these cards being a little higher. I don't think they all have to be competitive staples, but I think we need a few more competitive staples and then a few more compelling build arounds. And even like the fringier played ones still should do something a little more powerful, like we saw in the first 8 that I reviewed. Those are cards for the most part that are not, there's not much to do with them in general, and I'd like to see a shift closer to what we had in Spark of Rebellion, where we had 16 legendaries, like 10 of them were competitive staples, a few were like decent plug and plays, and maybe only a couple were really fringy. And that might not appeal to everyone. I just think I would prefer to see cards in that power level range. But yeah, let me know what you think of these cards, and until next time, take care.